Some of the memories will no longer have faces or bodies, only spirits, but you will be the vessel, the face and the body for the love that still lingers. You will be the voice for the ones who are not here to speak for themselves.
Thank you so much, Renati. Frans, could you read some of your work to us, please?
Sure. Well, I know this by heart, so I'll just recite it to me. Yeah. I rhyme to riot. The rhythm is petrol bomb. I am a struggle song gone wrong. A discord. A chord is missing harmony. Freedom writer. It's an insult when I ask. My tiny placard, uncensored. Ancestors extended in recitals. I unplug my heavy heart. Who to trust? In the crust of the ghetto you rust. My abstract craft is too rough. Thoughts like gravel. My pen digging the past like a shovel. And Bota gets a heart attack. I loosen the rope on Solomon's neck. I time travel, turning stones. I'm in Biko's notes. History don't like my tone, but I have to speak. Masakani bridge carry us deep into the belly of the abyss. And the matrix, the economic, I'm losing it. Yeah, I think I'll carry the...
Thank you so much, Frans. Busisiwe, do you have something you'd like to read to us?
Okay, this is titled I Wear Mother's Bones. I fit mama's clothes when she goes to work. I fit into the dances she had in them, into the panic of walking the streets at night, into the making of a home that will not hold. Her favorite dress is striped red and white with the lines pointing to her feet like a whisper, saying she must run. Her favorite blouse was blue. She was beautiful in it before it became a mouth swallowing her ugly along with her light. This one outfit, excused from scraping the floors and raising white children, saved for Sunday's gospel and prayers begging God for an answer. To look like mama is to look like sacrifice. Only a corner in the room, while Baba the whole house with himself. The mirror says I am drowning in a sket. I twirl in amazement. But mama's life is so beautiful, I can die in it. If death could tell me what made her laugh, made her happy with less, made her stay when she could run, what made her wear a blouse to watch herself drown. I want to tweak the sides with a needle and thread, but she will know that I wear her life when she goes. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Busisiwe. That's really beautiful. Frans, your poem that you read for us actually is one of the reasons that for the title of the book, which is Revolution and Rapture, because I just felt that it was almost like a call to revolution. And I'd like to ask you where the genesis of this poem arises and where you find your inspiration for your poetry in general. Can you unmute for us, Frans?
Sorry
thank
about
you.
that.
No worries.
I always say that as writers, we are mirrors of where we come from, and we reflect our societies, our families, and our friends. And I echo what I see. I write and echo what I see on a daily basis. The struggles that we go through in our society, as a family, as a community. The social ills and everything that comes with it. Being part of the community, I am just an extension of a voice extended of the people, and that's where I draw most of my inspiration from the people, from my neighbors, from my friends, from my family, from the average people I see daily. That's my inspiration. I write because of them.
Thank you very much. And for you, Busisiwe, where does the inspiration for your writing come from?
Similar to Frans, I am inspired by the community that has raised me, the people around me, the voices, the stories that form me. I am also inspired by works from different times. I'm inspired by different writers, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde. I'm inspired by Bessie Head. I'm a huge fan of the work that she was able to produce, I also draw a lot of inspiration from different art forms and mediums. I think not allowing myself to just consume poetry has also helped me sort of bring in imagery that I wouldn't normally find. Or sometimes you're reading nonfiction and you get an inspiration to write a poem. There's so many ways that work communicates, and I think that really is something that I find interesting, like being a scholar of the literature that exists today and trying to engage with it and responding to it. I find that I find that inspiring. You are muted.
Thank you, Busisiwe. I think it definitely comes through in your work, because the 3 of your poems that have been selected for the collection, Curfew on Dreams, In the Garden of Men, and To Water, I think Curfew on Dreams is just tells such a incredible story. One can almost see the whole of Fees Must Fall like passing in front of your eyes. So I think, carrying on that literary tradition, and how you say that you're inspired by, movements around you and literature that you consume. In the Garden of Men in particular is it stayed with me for such a long time afterwards. I think the place is a cemetery, but we call it a garden. There's often lines you mentioned referencing Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde and Bessie Head. So many of us, I think, have got like lines that they've written which just stay with you. And that's, I think, one of those lines that for me will definitely stay with me. I think the place is a cemetery, but we call it a garden. So I really thank you for these 3 works, and I'm pleased that you have shared them with us. Lenathi, where do you draw your inspiration from for your writing?
I would say I mostly say from feeling, but also from living, and also the important, kind of our version of how we experience the world. I think that's really important. So I think that really inspires me to share, my lens of the world, myself, my body, my mind, with the world. So yeah. Tracey, your mic is muted.
Thank you. Quite a few of your poems have got religious and spiritual theme. Can you speak a little bit about that and your interest in spirituality?
I think particularly for these poems for the anthology, I grew up in a very Christian environment, where my grandmother was going to church, and it was something that she really loved to do, and it was much part of who she was and how she saw the world. So for these poems, and I think for a lot of people in community, they can sort of relate to that. So I was kind of tapping into that experience of what spirituality means for us, especially as African people, as Black people, and what can we draw from that, but also how can we move forward from that as our experience. So yeah, I was very interested in wanting to kind of nitpick what about seeing my grandmother go to church every Sunday, what about it stood out to me, and what from that experience have I kept, and what can I learn from it?
Very evocative images that you've created. Your 2 poems, which we've placed side by side in the anthology, the Nicene Creed and Incha Yelelo, which you've taken original texts and kind of made a found poem from both of them. It just visually, it just looks so beautiful. And when you were writing those, I'm just interested in the process. Did you decide to do them both, the isiXhosa and the English, or how did you come upon that decision?
I actually initially wanted to only use Xhosa. I knew that I wanted to, as a form, use Eurasia. But for me, it started being a bit interesting to kind of find that link between, now that the first poem is obviously discussing spirituality, to kind of pull from that original text, from the dictionaries and the likes. So yeah, I initially wanted to use Xhosa, but the interesting part about this is, my partner usually says English is a very simple language. So when I approached the original text in Xhosa, it was actually very difficult to pull a poem out of there that obviously had to make sense and also kind of carry the theme that I was trying to go for. So I had to kind of step away a bit. I was sitting with both, because I actually have both the prayer books, English and Xhosa. So I had to sit with them for quite some time, kind of read those texts and see what I can pull out of them. And obviously approaching that, or those pieces of writing, I wanted to pull something different out of the text. So I really sat down with them, and eventually I was able to pull something out of there, and it felt really good. Honestly, it felt really good. Also, I haven't seen a lot of erasure poems in Xhosa, so that was also something that kind of drew me towards making it work, and kind of approaching it like that.
Yeah, I mean, they're both really beautiful, and they just look. I mean, it's just, I think with erasure poetry, it's something that can so easily go wrong, and yet you've done it, with such like nuance, and apart from them being visually beautiful, they also just read lyrically beautifully. So I think people are going to go back to the English Book of Prayers with a new eyes once they've read this anthology.
I
hope so too. So Cecilia, I'd like to ask you, the title of this project, Right to Speak. Do you find that there are things that you can say in poetry, in spoken word, in prose, that are easier, to manifest them in those iterations, rather than just, kind of general writing or other ways of communicating? Do you think there's something particular about poetry that allows you to voice feelings and opinions that you have?
Yeah, I think it's my introduction into poetry where I found the work to be brave. Like the poems I was reading when I was in high school, being brave, being able to say what you want to say. I was also in a poetry workshop session after school where we were just saying what we felt we could say. So that became, for me, the version or the medium that would allow me to be truthful in my work, to say what I think without any fear. I think that space, because of how I was introduced into it, because of my experience in the beginning as a writer, became that manifestation of the freedom of writing without any fear, without holding back. Now, as I'm growing as a writer, I'm finding more expressions. I'm finding other ways to sort of reflect my ideas, reflect how I see the world in fiction, in nonfiction, being critical in other forms of writing. When it comes to speaking, initially I wouldn't have, but being a stage poet, getting on stage, performing your poems has actually taught me that sometimes I would feel that the poem as it exists is enough. But for that moment, I want to go deeper and say the things that I couldn't say creatively in the piece. I think for me, poetry has also taught me to be more vocal, to take my stand more truthfully, to be braver, even in the world. Yeah.
And do you find, because you are such an accomplished spoken word poet, is there something in the way, so when you initially perform a spoken word piece, and then when you see it on the page, given that this is an anthology of printed works, and sometimes it's quite difficult to capture that courage, as you say.
Yes.
How do you feel when you see a poem that you've performed, and you see it on the page?
So usually my poems, when they get published, I'm very involved in the process. So I'm able to sort of bring that element of the stage, the pauses, where the pauses are, where the intention of every word, I get to sort of structure it around the page. And this has been challenging at first, but when I was working on my first book, Surviving Loss, which is published by Impepo Press, Vangile Kanjo, my publisher and editor, we sat down and I was reading the poems out and she was helping me. She was editing the poems in my voice, not just editing them in like the standard of this is what a poem on page is supposed to look like. But she was editing them in my voice, with me reading each and every piece, each and every emotion, the pauses, were reflective. I think they were very, very reflected on the book. And from that experience, it's a practice that I've taken with me when I'm editing other work, whether it's for a journal, whether it's the current manuscript that I'm working on. I always take into consideration my voice, because I write from my voice. That is, I think, the core of my writing is voice and imagery. So putting that into the editing process allows me to sort of merge the worlds between the poem on stage and the poem on page, even though there are differences.
Yeah, you can still really feel the essence of you coming through the words, which is wonderful. Frans, what is your experience of being able to, speak out about maybe unpopular opinions or share things that you feel strongly about? Do you find, is there something specific about poetry that draws you to this medium rather than to something else?
I'd say I'll focus more on the topic of the whole anthology, the right to speak. We are not really afforded the right to speak, and being on stage takes a lot of courage and guts, because there's so many sensitive topics that people don't want to touch, and being able to have the courage to put pen on paper and write about the specific topics that are very sensitive to other people is more or less a matter of life and death, in this kind of situations. And I'd say poetry has given not just me, but a lot of people a voice, because I grew up as an introvert. I believe I still am in my young adulthood, and because of I have a pen and paper in my room, I am able to speak, and lately I've been noticing that I don't really speak for myself. I speak, like I said earlier, I speak for my neighbor, I speak for my community, I speak for the whole of South Africa. I speak for people generally we go through the same struggles every single day, whether they are here or in Namibia or in America or in England or in Sweden. We go through the same struggles, and sometimes we take for granted what we have, what we are capable of, and because we are so consumed by our daily lives, we don't realize our power, and our 9-to-5s and then the yearn to survive, to live, suppresses everything else that you feel, and I think art kind of reminds us of who we are, it takes us back to what we want, who we are. It kind of helps us introspect ourselves, and that's one of my biggest inspirations to write, so that people do not forget their dreams, their inspirations, their aspirations too, and to hopefully push them to not be comfortable, because my work is very provocative, I push them to being their ultimate selves, also to push those who are comfortable with oppressing others, that this is not right. After all lives matter. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are from, all lives matter. And I don't necessarily mean that in a racist way. I mean that in a fundamental way, that everyone is like, we all have the right to live. We all have the right to water, the right to food, the right to education. All of us, not just Black people, not just Indian people, not but everyone, So I think art has given me a voice to speak for everyone, to advocate for people who are in the similar situations like I am, Yeah.
I mean, you spoke about that, being a matter of life and death. And I think that comes through very clearly in your poems, but also a lot of the other poems in the anthology. There's like an underlying rage and a kind of a desperation to be heard. And people are literally fighting for their right to live. And that's not a throwaway sentiment, especially not in a country like ours, which is racked with violence on so many levels. And I'm not just talking about personal interpersonal violence, but structural violence that people experience that kind of affects their daily sanity and their daily dignity. And you really managed to put across that sense of rage and revolution so well in your poems. A similar question to what Busisiwe addressed, the difference between speaking out. You say that you consider yourself an introvert. When you on stage, do you feel does the poetry like almost come through you, or do you find that happens more easily when you're sitting down with a pen and paper and then you translate it to a spoken word poem? Which comes first for you?
I think they are both equally. I'm free with both of them, being on stage and writing, because I get strength from when I'm on stage. I don't really do it for myself a lot. I speak mostly for people when I'm on stage, but when I'm on paper, it's me venting. It's where it's my therapy. It's my me time. The pen and paper thing is my me time,
Yes.
And when I get on stage, it's beyond just me, It's for everyone. So I think they're equally as important. I view them that way.
And for yourself, Lenati, your different experience and feeling like having your voice heard. This the title, this anthology has been developed together with the Hear My Voice project and Right to Speak. Like, do you feel that you have the right to speak, and do you feel that your poems make it easier for you to speak?
I think I agree with Franz when he says we would like to think that we have the right to speak, but we don't. But I think really via art and poetry, for me personally, and also I think for other artists as well, that is an avenue for us to explore so many different things that are necessary in our lived experience, in our landscape. So yeah, I think in terms of my poetry specifically, I really want to kind of leave a legacy. It sounds very heavy, but I do want to leave a legacy of, feeling, thinking, dissecting, reflecting, and that also kind of linking to healing as well. So I really do feel that in terms of my journey as a writer, I really am taking the necessary steps to say more, to do more, to feel more, to express more. So in that sense, yes, I would say I do have the right to speak, and I think it is important for me to create the kind of work that someone else can read, and it not just be about me, but about them as well. And kind of also, push them in the direction of, okay, I'm viewing this piece of work, where does it take me? What does it mean for me as well? Of course, not every single piece of writing needs to, be revolutionary and, have a specific kind of message. I think I even said this on the live that I recently did, that artists artists are allowed to create works that are just for consumption and that are fun, for them as an artist, but also for the next person. It doesn't all have to be about a message, but of course, it can also be about a message that's not in any way wholesome. Yeah, so I think it is important to give a platform for not just ourselves, for other people as well. And even what Franz said about writing being therapy, I agree. I agree with that. I think it is important for us to use our artworks as a form of healing for ourselves and for the next person. Yeah.
I think, what you touched on as well is that right to joy, that as much as, it almost, when you use the word legacy, and I don't think that's too big a word, and I think that, all three of you as young poets are definitely leaving a legacy and will have, people in the future look up to you, but that's kind of permission to both the right to speak about things that enrage you, but also the right to speak about what makes you happy, what gives you moments of joy and what gives you moments of love, because there's, it's difficult to be it's easy to be angry all the time in some ways in South Africa, but it's also difficult. It takes a lot of energy and saps a lot of joy. And I think you speak about that, that right to have joy and love and hope and a family and, just kind of ordinary things, which that people that might not necessarily feel they have the right to access. But you say, for yourself, that experience of moments of lightness, of joy, things outside of rage, outside of revolution, outside of speaking about the really hard topics that confront us, every day in South Africa. What are your thoughts about that?
When they say like an artist reflects the time, I think that's not only pertaining to chaos, to struggle, to pain, but also reflect the times when you are happy, when you are enjoying life, when you have community. And I find that to be very important. I was in the manuscript that I'm working in now, I was looking through it, and I was like, wow, if I were to see this in 5 years, I'll think this was such a sad period of my life. And I felt like I was not reflecting honestly my life or the topics that I wanted to write. Yes, the poems that were written and that were there were honest, but they were only sort of like single vision of the freedom to write, the joy I wanted to write, and all of those things are very personal, but they can be understood universally in a way. And I think it's always been an unwritten or unspoken requirement where we have to reflect the times. Like you have music today where there's Amapia and people are like, what's the point of the song? The point of the song is to make people dance, to make people happy, and this is why the work exists, and that's enough. So just looking at literature and poetry and writing with that same lens, that there's work that exists because it exists, and that is enough.
It doesn't have to justify its existence by proving a point or sending a message. It can just be because it just is, and it brings joy and happiness and just, makes you feel delight. How do you find that balance now? You say you're reading through your manuscript and you feel that it's heavily weighted in terms of a down period. How do you actively pursue any methods that you use to try and access both sides?
Yes. So I made that realization around, I think, April, and then I went into the JS Writers Workshop, and throughout that month, I was working on writing on joy, and I was like, oh, I have to write a happy poem. I have to write a happy poem, and it didn't feel natural to me because it felt like I had this checklist for my manuscript that, okay, a body makes fire has to have poems on this and poems on that and poems on that. So I did write poems that were happy and poems about love and poems about feeling, but it really felt like I was sort of ticking a checklist that I made for myself. But then, because it was such an unnatural thing for me as a writer who's learned to that writing, I'm writing because I want to heal, I'm writing because it was such an unnatural space to step into. I had decided then that I would keep forcing myself to write on joy, because it's practice. Like any other thing, it's practice. I'm forcing my eye to look at something beautiful and to find it worthy to write about, and I think it's starting to feel more natural. Sometimes I will just open my laptop, I'll write on my notebook, and I'll find that I've just written something that is light, and I didn't even have to think about it. I didn't have to be like, okay, no, we can't make this poem, we can't put conflict in this poem, or we can't make this poem about heartbreak, but like I'm arriving at a place where it's becoming more natural. My process was just accepting that because this is a new gaze that I'm putting on my work and on my life as well, it's gonna take time to become natural in it. And that patience, I think, is very important when you're stepping into a new art form, new genre, a new environment, to just keep practicing, because that practice will help you find ways that actually work for you, because writing is personal. Someone can give you advice and it might not work for you. It's personal. You have to investigate, you have to uncover, unpack, and you'll find something that works really for you.
So you're saying that it almost like the more you practice joy and lightness and happiness, the more you practice it, the more it will become like an everyday feeling rather than something you have to try and, deliberately dig for in a way.
And the more I practice putting a spotlight on it, because joy and happiness and lightness were already there in my life. I just never had that, never written about it. I've written about it. There's so much hope in my work. There's so much light, but it's hope that exists side by side with pain. So I wanted to find a way for that hope to exist, because it exists, for that light to exist on its own. So just putting a spotlight on things that are already in my life, things that I'm already observing in my community.
And France, light and hope and joy, how do you feel about writing about those topics? Are there things that you notice, that you pay attention to and write about, or do they feel out of reach?
I to some extent I echo what Lucy was just saying right now. For so long my work was based on pain, hardships, social ills and all that negative stuff. And later on, when I started interrogating my writing, my pen, I realized that there's so much I want to say. Like, there's so much positive stuff I want to say, but I'm holding on to this pain that I've felt for so many years that it eludes everything else that you want to write, and I started experimenting, like writing happy poems, but not performing them, not sharing them, and just keeping them for myself, like write happy poems and put them to the side for myself, and recently I started writing. I think I have like 2 poems or 3 poems now, happy poems that I'm comfortable with sharing on stage, of which is something I've never done before, and it's something totally different to hear from me, people that know France know like type of poems I write, and hearing something fresh and happy is kind of like weird, and to some extent, I think Linati said it, that as a writer you need to have a balance. Sometimes write poems or create any art for creating, because you're a creator, not for it to have like ulterior motive or like a deep meaning or anything of that sort. Create because you're a creator, and there's a poem I wrote for my grandma. I think it's one of the poems I wrote there. It goes something like, take 5 autumn leaves. I think it's one of the poems there. I wrote that poem because I lost my grandmother in 2020 in December, and like her memories were like the only memories I have with her are happy memories, so I couldn't write anything sad. I wanted to write something so sad because I literally lived my whole life with her, so but the only things I could think of were happy things, and I wanted to stop myself from writing that happy poem, but I eventually I stopped thinking negative, I'm like, we only have good memories, why not just write a good happy poem about her, and the courage to do it, and I can share it with people, and that's one of the things I recently learned about myself, that you can write happy, or you can create happy art, without it having to feel guilty about it. It's sort of like we owe pain so much, because we are so loyal to pain that we even need people to hurt us in order to create. When you are happy, you can't create. Like it becomes like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I create? And then you start looking for negative things, so that you can create.
I hear you. I mean, I think the poem that you wrote for your grandmother, Koko, is just also so beautiful, and the theme, the anthology kind of follows a bit of a journey. So it starts off with poems that are really angry, come from a place of rage, speak of revolution, speak to a lot of the issues that South Africa deals with, and then I found that there was almost a balance in the poems in the anthology, that there was also these moments of lightness and joy and family and celebrating people that we love. And I have obviously never met your grandmother, but she sung through this page. You can see her. I call God's name. I see Koko's face. It can't be coincidence. I pay homage to the grave that holds my lineage. I claim rain. I wear my surname. Grandma's hands don't care if you're a sinner or a saint. In your voice, I find refuge, seed of your womb, nectar moon. I pay homage to your womanhood. I mean, she really just jumps out of the page, and it's so wonderful that you felt able to celebrate her in that way. Lenati, do you find that when you sit down to write a poem, how does your process work? Does moments of inspiration just grab you randomly during the day, like a creative artist, or is it something that you sit down and work at?
Do you know what? I recently realized that every time, like, I feel like my answer is different for that question. But more than anything, I think I've also realized that we are in the process even when we don't think we're in it. So I think lately I've started to embrace that when I'm consuming other forms of art, when I'm in conversation, when I'm having my private moments with myself, even though I don't think that contributes in any way to a specific kind of project or poem or what, I then later realized in retrospect that, actually, I was working there, I was creating something there. So I think I've really found that really interesting, especially this conversation right now about lightness, about pain, is actually, I feel, a bigger identity conversation, especially with African writers. I think we have so much to cover. We have so much to cover, we have so much to tell, we have so much to undo. And I think it is important for us I love what Francais said, it is important for us to try and identify outside of those things. Who are we if not that, if not those experiences, not that those experiences don't matter to us, or that we, in our being, in our existing, we aren't in any way attached to those experiences anymore. But I think it's very important for us to identify outside of them in a way that still kind of creates forward movement, I think that's what I also love about the idea around the anthology, is that, okay, we are discussing certain things, but, how are we moving forward? What does, the future look like, for us as Africans? Yeah, so I think even that in itself, this conversation, I feel like it's also part of the process. So yeah, I respect every single moment leading up to working on a poem, even before sitting down to, Google Docs, the empty Google Docs page will stay at you for some time. Before things actually make sense. But yeah, I think I've come to really appreciate, my interaction with the world, my place in it, and how that links to the actual poem before the poem works out and, people kind of experience it. Also, that makes me think of, I've been reading a lot of Mary Oliver's work, and I think she's a very important writer to mention in this conversation, because she really, was very much inspired by the mundane, by everything, actually, you know, smallest things, nature, you know, relationships, love. So I really think if we want to have a discussion about lightness, you know, and where to draw inspiration from, aside from the pain, I think her works are very, you know, are very actually, you know, nice to reference if you want to talk about that.
And it's also interesting, I mean, you know, she writes a lot about nature, a lot of her poems, you know, about animals and the natural environments. And I think that's where she drew a lot of her inspiration from. And again, interesting in the anthology that a lot of the moments of joy and hope were focused on people either paying homage or doing a pilgrimage back to a place of nature, whether that be water or earth or trees, and that connection to the earth, you know, that kind of inspired some sense of joy and hope for the future. Because I think what you're saying, you know, so correct, that there's almost feels like there's a burden of responsibility on especially young Black African writers to write away the problems of the world, you know, to rewrite history, write away the problems of the world, decolonialize the curriculum, just fix everything while you're at it. And then on the side, you can have a little smidgen of joy and love and happiness and hope, and it seems like a bit of a large and unfair responsibility for young people to bear. So I'm glad to hear that you're finding the balance and seeking joy in both of them. I just wanted to ask you one question, following on from what Franz had said about writing the poem for his grandmother, that you'd also spoken about, you know, your grandmother going to church and how, you know, visions of her being at church inspired some of your poetry. Do you feel, you know, is there a lot of moments of connection that you find with, you know, both your immediate intimate family and your broader family that you feel you can bring to your work?
Definitely. I think being my age and still having my grandfather around actually has also made me realize that these people have lived, like, you know, it's just long. They've lived long, and that also influences, you know, what they've seen, the experiences that they've had, you know, and there's a lot of information, and, you know, they're like walking archives. So I think definitely, you know, the people around me do influence my work in that sense. Like, I'm always trying to get a story out of my granddad, you know, yeah. And I think that's very important in also kind of not comparing, but like having that reference point, and how that, you know, again, helps us move forward. You know, what is my version? He can tell me a specific kind of story, or my grandparents can tell me a specific kind of story, but what am I hearing, you know, from my lens, and how do I choose to see it? So yes, I feel like that's really, really important to me. And also, I think it's really important for us to, again, like we've discussed with lightness, be able to control the narrative. I think if the stories are coming from the source, it heightens, you know, our chances of being able to tell our own stories from lived experience and control our narrative, you know. So I think it is important to talk to people on ground. I also recently read Mercy Mandega's book, Don't Upset Malume, and she does like deep dives into Xhosa culture. And for that book to be what it is, she really like was on ground interviewing, you know, elders, speaking to people, you know, spending time. You know, it wasn't just a project that, you know, it seems like it wasn't a project that she worked on from far, you know.
Yes,
she was
really delved into it, yes.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It was really excavated.
Yeah, so I think something about that is really beautiful, and I think as young people, that kind of pushes us, you know, to ask the right questions, because technically, at some point, we will be the people with the information. We will be the people at the center of, you know, telling other people. So I think as much as we want to create a new, completely different narrative, it's also important for us to make space for, you know, what has happened, you know, people's stories. And I think that was my approach to the poems of the anthology. I wanted to create something that would trigger nostalgia, you know, out of someone. And I know like a lot of people who would remember like or have memories of their grandparents waking them up in the morning. Why are you going to church? Why are you late? No, that rush in the morning.
Yes.
So I really wanted that to be kind of that warm feeling of something that's familiar. But I think with the erasure, it was more of a, okay, now that we've brought this familiar feeling forward, how do we create something that, still familiar, but that's completely different.
And take your own meaning from it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really important for us to kind of be in it.
Busisiwe, do you find there's any things that, given that this is about the right to speak, are there things that people are still afraid to speak about, still uncomfortable about writing about?
I think there will always be things that people are afraid to speak about or things that they're afraid to write about. I think that is why we need writers to make that, to fill that space, to fill that gap. So yeah, I think there will always be that need to document, to archive, to reflect honestly. I think even for myself as a writer, there are things that I'm still making my way to, and there are things that I'm still uncovering, and there are things that I'm like, I'm not gonna send this to any journals after they've been written. I'm not gonna perform this on stage. Yeah. Some of them I can't even share it with my friends. So I think that kind of uncovering something is the important path. And then you will get to a point where you are able to share it. You are able to share it with people, read it, send it to journals. But I think removing the audience, I think this also relates to Linati's answer on process, that the process is always different. Even for me, the process is always different. So removing the pressure of the audience, removing the pressure that anyone, I write in a way that I think no one is gonna find this thing. This is my secret. Yeah. This is my view. No one will see this. And I think that kind of point of departure in my work allows me to write honestly. And after the work is written, that's when I'm like, I cannot share this. I really cannot share this. I think that allows me to find the things that I'm comfortable with sharing and find the things I'm not comfortable with sharing. Each work requires a different process in itself. It requires you to approach the work in a different way, to handle the work in a different way. There are poems that we are writing today that probably will only be read in 10 years' time. And that's just the process each work asks of you. Yeah. So there will always be things that are uncomfortable, even for the writer who's written them. And yeah, I think that friction will exist. And as long as art exists, that friction will exist, I assume.
It's almost like that you use the bedrock of the stuff that's maybe written but not published, and that you've uncovered for yourself personally, but not in a space where you want to uncover it for other people. But that's the kind of like material, the fertilizer that helps you grow the stuff that you do share with people, that you do have published, that you need that other work underneath it, in a sense, to kind of give it the push to, to allow the other work to see light.
Yeah, I've found that for me, sometimes it's because I've never seen something like this, like maybe something like that I've written. And reading, like the more I read, the more I realize that, oh, this exists, or I feel affirmed in the work. I think James Baldwin says something about sometimes
exactly
your pain is unprecedented until you read and you realize that. Yeah. And I think that kind of reading, that kind of consuming art, reading, having conversations with people, like Linati said, like that kind of, like the crossing of stories, is what gives you that, what affirms your work, that what makes you move forward, even though this is something that you're afraid to say, you get to a point where you're like, it's necessary to say it because 1, 2, 3, and you're affirmed by these conversations and these works that you're reading and these stories that you're hearing, and that allows you to share.
Frans, for you, are there topics that you feel that you can't speak about or don't speak about, or just topics in general that you think South African poets are afraid to broach? Are there topics that people won't go near?
Hey man, I write about anything and everything.
Good, I'm pleased to hear that.
I write about anything and everything. But the bad is that I share according to the atmosphere, you know.
Okay.
I read my crowd very well, so I share according to where I am, who I'm with, and stuff like that, because you don't want to offend people and look like, you know, be that guy. So, but I write about anything and everything, you know. I'm not shy to experiment with my pen. Also, I think there's a lot of topics that people are afraid to write about, you know, and generally so, you know, I've seen a couple of my friends getting a backlash about certain topics they wrote about and shared, you know, the poems on stage public. And I think it's very sad, you know. I think it's very sad because now you think you are depriving this artist the right to speak, but you're not. You're actually depriving yourself the opportunity to learn, you know. And I think as a community, if we can afford each other or give each other that courtesy to speak about any topic, general, not even to write or to express it in an artistic form, but just to speak about anything and everything, I think we'd have a better society. You know, I think certain things are happening now because we don't talk about them. Certain topics have become taboo, you know, like very taboo, that they are normal. We don't question them anymore. Like things go, they're not as wrong as they would be 10 years ago. You know, right now, things that were wrong 10 years ago, we tolerate them, we live with them, you know. And I think it gets worse as time goes by. And I think what Busi said about documenting time is important, you know, so that maybe 50 years from now, 80 years from now, people must know that smoking nyobe is wrong. You know, if Busi wrote about smoking nyobe and she's clearly saying it's wrong in her poem, people in 2070 or 2080 will know that nyobe is wrong, even though in their lifestyle then it will be right. They will know, you know, because Busi will documented time, you know. And I think that's the importance of documenting art, you know, for reference, for people in the future to reference about humanity, where humanity is then, and then they'll be able to reflect on what humanity is, you know. And I think that's what we've been doing also with the art that happened before, you know. We listen to it, we reflect to it, we dance to it, and it reminds us of what humans are, you know, and how humans behave, how humans talk, how humans eat, you know, how humans dance, how humans cry, you know. Like there's movies, there's music, there's so much we learn from, you know. And without it, I don't think would be relevant, you know. Without art generally, I don't think would be relevant to each other, you know. From someone who's in Soweto to someone who's in Devon to someone who's in the UK, I don't think without art would be relevant to each other.
I think what you're saying about, you know, censorship and people closing down conversations and not discussing things, that in a way art gives us that freedom and hopefully allows us to speak about things that maybe, you know, there's sections of the community that don't necessarily want to speak about things, because as much as, you know, there's a right to speak, everybody also has a right to listen. You know, that, you know, I think you don't get to deprive somebody of the right to listen to something because you want to, you know, to quieten their right to speak. Do you think, Lenati, for yourself, the voice of poets, the voice of artists, I think, as Francis alluded to, have been so important throughout the ages. And as much as we speak and we write and people perform, the audience that listen, do you think that what do you think that the impact of art can make on people that consume is not the right word, but you know what I'm saying, that either read your poetry, listen to it, watch performance? What do you think the impact can have on audiences?
I think before I kind of answer that question, I also want to say I think it's important to consider how people consume what they consume when they're ready to. They find what they need at the point where they have the comprehension for it, and where it's more relevant to them. So I think looking at that kind of pushes the artist to not censor themselves, but more to be, I guess, understanding and sort of like give more grace to the listener in terms of how they receive the work and when they receive the work. So I don't think the artist has a responsibility to, necessarily highly censor themselves. I mean, be sensitive to that specific community or that group that you are, speaking about. That's very important, and do your research. But I think completely not speaking about certain topics is like, it's a bit limiting for everyone involved.
Yeah,
it's for everyone involved, the listener and the artist. But yeah, in terms of what listeners can get from art and poetry, I think a lot. It's actually very amazing that we have so many writers right now who speak about so many different things, and I think that's also something very important to remember as an artist. And I'm definitely saying this to myself as well. We don't all have to discuss the same topic or feel the need to approach writing in the same way. I think there has been, sort of maybe not so much an expectation, but an undertone of African poetry and poetry in general to be a certain kind of way. And I think I'm excited for us as African writers to have different things and have different voices and do different things. So I think because of that, the listener has, or the audience has, again, whether it's to be seen in terms of what they've been through, it's just, again, looking for the joy. I think there is a lot at our disposal and at the listener's disposal. I think the listener gets what they want at that point in time when they're ready to.
Yes.
So I think based on that, there's really a lot going around. There's really a lot to get, and maybe even from the same artist. I think it's also important to recognize that artists don't have to be one thing like their whole life. I can wake up tomorrow and decide I don't want to speak about healing anymore. I want to speak about something else. And I think the audience has a tendency of kind of seeing you. Of course, maybe even as artists, we blur the lines in that sense. But I think a lot of times, like, the audience will see you speaking about one topic or see you writing in a specific kind of way and kind of tie you down to that. So I think it's very important for everyone involved to kind of to have grace in that sense, and to let the artist and the audience evolve, which is why I think when it comes to being an artist and like where your work goes, I think it's really something you can't control. Yes, you can say you have a specific kind of audience and you have a kind of person you want your work to land, but I've also come to realize that the work goes where it needs to go. And I think we also become who we need to become in front of who we need to be in that moment or in that time as an artist. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, I can't believe that we have actually come to 2:00 and it's time to end the session. It's been an absolute joy speaking to the three of you. It was wonderful to read your words. I feel honored to have had the privilege to compile them in this anthology. So thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts and opinions and your words and your hearts with us. Thank you very much, Lenati. Thank you, Busisiwe, and thank you, France. And I really encourage everybody, the anthology will be available in an e-publication digitally from today. And at next year's Time of the Writer, it'll be available in a tangible book to hold, which I know for a lot of people, including myself, is always nice to have the pages you can carry around with you in your bag and make notes on. So thank you so much, and thank you to the Centre for providing this opportunity. And I hope that you all have a fabulous day further.